Welcome to the Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, where every death had a life and every life had a story. My name is Jennie Johnson.
Hello, and I'm Diane Hartshorn.
And we are super thrilled to have our guest joining us today. Another guest. So we had Charlie last week. This week, we have somebody who came across, he was doing some genealogy, doing some family research, and then this all led to him becoming a phenomenal preservationist in cemeteries, where in his, not just his hometown, but around your state. So we would like to welcome to the show today, Kurt Jordan, who is also known as the Casey Cemetery Man, if you look on his social media accounts or his website. So welcome to the show, Kurt.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you. Very honored to be here.
Oh, like I said, we were both going through all the stuff that you had sent us and your website, and just fascinated by the amount of stuff that you have done in relatively a short amount of time. When I think about it, from the time you actually started repairing, when it started with your great grandfather, and we'll tell that story, to where you're at now with it. I mean, you've only been doing this for a dozen years or so, and it's just become this huge part of your life now. So, but it's a very important part of your life. We talk about preservation on this show a lot, and we've had other preservationists with us on the show to talk about the importance of why we do it and the proper techniques to use. And you've really taken the time to learn those techniques and perfect them, and you share them with others, which is absolutely fabulous. Like, you do this at no charge, and you go out there and you help people learn how to do it and do it yourself, to make sure that things are taken care of and there for future generations. So for that, we say thank you very much.
Well, it's my pleasure. It really is. It's something as you've gathered, I'm very passionate about. You're correct.
It's a good passion to have. So tell us how it started. I mentioned it started with your great grandfather. How did it go from being just this like genealogy research to actually repairing these headstones?
Well, that's a question that comes up frequently. So I'll try to give you a brief version of this. You're correct. I've always been fascinated by my family history and genealogy. And I guess I gathered that from my late father, who was always sharing tidbits of information about our ancestors growing up. And the way I became involved with cemetery preservation, a few years ago, he shared with me that he had discovered a cemetery near our hometown. And he said, it took a number of years to find this place. He said, but we have ancestors buried there. And he said, including what would be my great great grandfather. And he said, along with finding it, he said, I discovered that the headstone of my great great grandfather and two of his sons who are buried there all had toppled over. The obelisk had toppled over. And he asked me when I came to town, I was living in Dallas at the time. I now live in Kansas City. But he had asked me if I would help him repair the headstones. Well, in all honesty, my dad was not in any condition to repair any headstones. I said, well, the way you could help me, you could sit in a lawn chair and watch me do it. So we had a wonderful day repairing headstones. And this is at the Greenwick Cemetery in what's called Amazonia, Missouri. It's Andrew County, Missouri, in Northwest Missouri. And so after repairing those three headstones, literally that day, I'm looking around this sacred site, and it is in shambles, and through no one's fault, just age and ground settling, and probably some cattle getting onto the property from time to time. The majority of the headstones were toppled over, obelisk. Tablets were fractured. They were laying flat on the ground. The property was being mowed, but the mowers were going right over the flat tablets that were embedded in the ground and virtually at any point being lost to history. And something about this just did not set right with me. And it struck me to the core that this needed to be fixed. And I didn't know who was going to fix it, but I had a pretty good inclination it was going to be me. And that's how it started.
Yeah, that's how I got involved. It's like, yep, you're the only one that's going to do it. So,
well, we're glad you wanted to do it. And, I was also thinking, you're talking about some of these cemeteries, especially in the Midwest, I mean, the winters are harsh. And so that's not great for the cemeteries. And then the summers are hot and humid. So you think about what the stone has to go through with these constant temperature changes over the decades, because this particular cemetery was established according to the sign in 1845. So it's an old one. And you think about all the expanding and shrinking and sun damage and weather damage. And like you said, cattle probably had their pick of grass around the stones, and the cows don't care what the stones are doing. So I'm really glad that you wanted to take I mean, it's a big project to restore an entire cemetery, but I'm glad you wanted to take it on.
Yeah, I was interested because when I saw Mr. Breckenridge's headstone, because we have a town here in Colorado named Breckenridge, who was named after a Civil War veteran, and I was trying to see if it was a relation, but I didn't find that it was. And then also he died on July 4th, 1863. So am I assuming he died at Gettysburg then?
I have a fascinating story about Mr. Breckenridge. He was, you're correct. His date of his death is the 4th of July, 1863. Tragically, he was shot and killed at his front door one evening.
Mm.
And shortly thereafter, a couple of his younger children passed away that same year.
Oh,
His
geez.
wife was injured in the same incident, but she lived a number of years, and they had another child that grew to full adulthood. Here's where the story becomes really fascinating. I think you'll both enjoy this because I know you're based in Colorado. There is a historian and also a descendant of an individual at the Greenwick Cemetery that I've corresponded with during this process of repairing the cemetery. And she was fascinated by following the Breckenridge family to find out more about where they lived and how things progressed. George Breckenridge ultimately had a great-great-grandson that served in World War II, and he was a sergeant in the Air Force. He is buried at the Pikes Peak National Cemetery in Colorado Springs.
Oh, wow.
So right up the road from you.
Yes, and this individual that had shared this with me, by pure circumstance or coincidence, I guess I should say, she lives in Colorado Springs. So on the 4th of July of 2023, the anniversary of the grandfather's demise, she went to that headstone just by accident, got out of her car, walked directly to his headstone and placed a flag there to commemorate, everything, just kind of bringing this full circle. So just really a fascinating story. Again, so many times, this is not truly unusual, but you get into cemetery preservation, repairing headstones, and it's really the stories behind the stones that are so fascinating. So I thought, I'd share that with you since it came full circle and back to Colorado.
That is really cool.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, the other thing is this brings a lot of people together because it brought you together with this woman from Colorado who you didn't know before, but in your research and then her research, it all led to this fascinating story of this family and everything they'd kind of been through. And if you had not gone into the cemetery and realized the amount of work that needed to get done and then wanted to know more, that's a story we may not have made those connections with now, but now there's two people for sure who've made the connection and are recording the story, which I think is fabulous. So you took on the task of fixing up Greenwick Cemetery there in Missouri. And after you kind of did that, how did you go from working on this one cemetery to working on all these other cemeteries that you've been a part of and the preservation projects with them?
Well, it kept expanding because I, along with taking training and learning what I was doing, which was really essential, the next most important step was gaining approval from the entity that had responsibility for Greenwick Cemetery. In this case, it was a group of county commissioners that were very supportive of my efforts at Greenwick.
Oh, good.
And once they saw what I was doing at Greenwick, they said, "You've got a green light. Just basically anything I wanted to do in their county was okay with them. Of course, I always checked in and shared my progress. I wanted to keep them up to speed, but I've worked in a number of cemeteries across their county. And of course, like anything, once you make progress one place, the word gets out. And the next thing I know, I'm traveling across the state of Missouri, either doing the repairs myself or training others and kind of overseeing their efforts. So but it really started there in Andrew County, Missouri.
So
That's
where did you, when you looked at your grandfather's headstone and he was, or great grandfather, right? Great grandfather?
two times great
Great,
grandfather.
Great.
yes, that's
Okay.
correct. Yeah.
He was definitely in several pieces. So what training did you receive before you attempted that? Because I would have been terrified to do that.
This is before I really received much training. My background, I'll just say, it was in paint and coatings for a number of years. So I was familiar with epoxies and different concrete materials and how they interacted with one another. So I used materials that I had knowledge of, and special two-component epoxies. As it turns out, they were pretty close to what I would actually end up using. Fortunately, I didn't do any harm. I did more right than wrong, I guess, even in the absence of training. So that's how I did the first three. And then beyond that, I learned the proper products and techniques and everything to make sure everything I'm doing is correct and following, as we say, the do no harm method for restoration.
Right. And that's the important thing. And the thing is, we're constantly learning when we're doing this. Like, things change over time and new products are developed as we learn more about, masonry and what works and what doesn't and all the things that go into it. But yes, we try our best in that time frame that we're working to make sure that we're doing the safest possible techniques for preserving these stones. But it could change over time, and that's okay. I think those of people like yourself, people like us, Dianne, Rachel from Epic Preservation, we're all constantly learning and watching and finding out what new techniques are being developed, what new products are brought on the market, and then paying attention to whether those are products we should or shouldn't be using. Because sometimes stuff comes up where somebody will say something and you're like, that doesn't sound right, and then you do a little more research. But for the most part, I think a lot of people who do this are really invested in trying to make sure they're going to do something that's going to last as long as it can, at least another, hopefully 50 years or more before it needs another major repair. And again, that depends on the type of stone and where you're at and all of that. But you have managed to, and I'll show some other pictures, you've managed to do a lot of like workshopping with folks, and really helping other people learn how not only to repair, but some of the pictures you sent us, you were showing techniques on how to clean the stones, and what to use there. So I think that's really great that people have someone in Missouri like yourself that can do that. Not every state has somebody like you that can come through and help do it as much as you've done. I mean, you've traveled throughout Missouri to do this too. You're not just doing like the cemetery next to your house type thing. You're going and Missouri's not a little state, so that's a lot of traveling you're doing.
That's correct, and I take a lot of pride in the workshops we do on headstone cleaning. I hear from a lot of historical societies and groups across the state that they learn of what I'm doing, and as you mentioned, everything I do is free of charge. It's just my way of giving back to society. And they reach out to me and we schedule a time and I show up. And one of the first things we do is just talk about protecting the stones and treating them correctly and the safe and ethical way of cleaning the headstones. And it's really a first step. Oftentimes I'll do a workshop on cleaning headstones, then we'll schedule a time where I'll come back and we'll get into a little bit more sophisticated type work, like repairing a fractured tablet or something like that. But oftentimes we'll start off with cleaning, and most people, after a brief instruction period and some oversight, can do it correctly. And right away they get kind of the immediate gratification of improving the look of a stone, but also recognizing that it will take a period of time for like D2 cleaner to work its magic, and not to expect every stone to look like a shiny penny the first day. As I say, let D2 work, and just come back in a few months and take a look at it. And I think everyone's very surprised. And the other beautiful thing about cleaning a headstone, once you clean a headstone, you kind of have a pride of ownership with it as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I always encourage everyone to take a photograph before you even touch it. The before picture, we'll take an after picture, come back in 6 months or a year and take another picture. And then the other thing is also go online and look up this individual.
Mhm.
Use Find a Grave, something like that. Find out something specifically about this individual. Where are they from? Find out anything you can about their family. And it just really makes us such a powerful and personal connection for the individual. So now it moves beyond cleaning simply a headstone, but making a connection with the past as well.
I love that. Well, and also if they're making that sort of connection, even if this is not somebody in their own family tree, it's a totally separate family tree, but there's always the chance that that family isn't in the area anymore to care for the stone, but now they have somebody who's going to, like you said, they've taken pride in this stone. So now they're going to keep an eye on it in the future and make sure that it's maintained and cared for, even though there may not be a relative nearby to do so. And for those people that are further out, maybe looking for somebody, and then they come across this, and then they find that the stone's been well cared for and stuff. I personally know I would appreciate that if I were looking for a family member, and then I came across a stone that's been very well taken care of. And I think that's awesome. But then it shares those stories, and like you said, it makes those connections to the past that weren't being made before.
Well, the other thing I talk about a lot, I'm sorry, go ahead, Diane.
I was going to say, and to teach the proper techniques is amazing, because Jenny and I have watched horror films on people doing headstone cleaning on YouTube, because people think, oh, they could just turn on YouTube and they see people doing a method, and I'm closing my eyes because it was horrific. But then people look at that and think that person is an expert, because that's how they sort of came across. So I think it's so valuable what you are doing to teach people the proper techniques to clean a headstone, because it's really not that hard. You just got to know what you're doing and use the right materials and products.
Be patient.
Along with the cleaning, there's just kind of I use the term pride of ownership as well. It should be, especially in these rural cemeteries.
Mm-hmm.
It takes the citizens that live in the area to maintain them. And when I talk about maintaining, frankly, it goes beyond cleaning and resetting headstones. It can be as simple as making sure the property is mowed and tree branches are picked up, and
Mm-hmm.
if trees have fallen, remove them. And it doesn't take a great skill level to do that. It just takes a recognition that as society we have an obligation to take care of these sacred sites. And so I talk a lot about that too, along with the cleaning of the stones and how to repair them. I also talk about just the obligation that we have to take care of these things too.
Well, I appreciate that. And you've made connections across your state with historical societies, people who are, individuals who are just interested in their local history, all of that. And so you're fueling them with more passion to preserve that. And then our future generations in 20, 30, 40 years can come into the same space. And with modern technology, now we're going to have a recording of somebody's story, most likely in a digital format now, but they can go in and find it, and they can look and see, like you said, places like Find a Grave and A Billion Graves. And there's a couple different other sites where you can do that. And now we've come full circle, and we're remembering people that are forgotten and remembering simpler stories, because there's plenty of well-known people whose graves are usually maintained fairly well, but it's the everyday people that went about their business doing whatever they did for their community. And those are the ones that tend to kind of get forgotten over time. And you're making them bring those stories back, and bringing back that what brought people to the area in the first place. Why did they go to Missouri out of all the places they could have settled? Were they going to go there and then maybe go west and then decided to stay in Missouri, that kind of thing. Like there's all kinds of reasons why they may have stayed in Missouri and didn't leave the area. So I think that's amazing that people are delving into that and that Missouri is creating its history in such a way through their cemeteries and through you.
And I did notice on your Facebook page for, I want to say it properly, the KC Cemetery Man, which I love. Next to fact, the headstones on your cover photo are amazing because each one, they're the upright marble ones, but each one has such unique carvings on them. They're just absolutely gorgeous. I'm assuming the black stands are those QR codes?
The metal stakes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's correct. That's exactly what those are.
Okay. So
That's so
did you
cool.
put those in, or
Well,
was it a project the cemetery did?
no, that I was. I'll say I was instrumental in that, just because as we're talking, we quickly discovered the stories behind the stones, and as I'm working on all these projects, I would race home every night. I'm doing research on who were these individuals, and as fate would have it, I had the amazing good fortune of meeting a kindred spirit. And this is a woman. I'm going to share her name, and she will probably cringe because I'm sharing it, but her name is Monica Eshelman, and she is a wonderful genealogist who helped craft biographies for about 60 families
Oh, wow.
at this Greenwick Cemetery. Monica, for 30 to 40 years, had compiled a great deal of history and information about the families, and I recognized that she had this great information, and I told her, I said, gosh, we need to put this in a different format so it is preserved for history and twofold. One, folks that go to the greenwickcemetery.com website, they can look up the history of these families, or visitors to the site can simply scan the QR codes and pull up the same information we have whenever possible. We have photographs of the individuals, their families, what brought them to Missouri, what was their occupation, just snippets of information about who they were, and essentially at that point we're bringing the stones to life. The stories behind the stones. So that's how it came to pass, and it's really rewarding. I've heard from a number of the descendants there at Greenwick really appreciative of that.
That's really cool because they're very small, and they're not like, they don't take up a lot of space. They're not in the way. And because of the cemetery where I work at, we've been going back and forth of ideas how to possibly do that. And I think I may have possibly found the way how to do that.
Well, and the other thing I would share is I was very opposed to, and I know this does exist, but for me personally, I didn't want to attach anything to the markers themselves.
Right.
I felt like we needed to maintain the integrity of the stone and not affix something to that. So, at some point, if we come up with better technology, it's pretty easy to remove a stake with a QR code and do something else.
No, I like it because it's very neat. It's very small. It just looks very, very nice.
Yeah. No, and I think, I know about some of those companies where you can affix the QR codes. And I think that's great maybe for brand new headstones, a modern headstone, because you can incorporate it into the stone and the design. But yes, these older stones that were carved before such technology was even ever thought of, I like that you're maintaining that integrity, but still giving people a way to find out these stories while they're standing there in front of the stone and making a connection. And you could be a stranger to you, but now you get to make that connection with history right there and then, and get excited about it. And then I can just see, well, I know for me personally, if it were me, I'd be going from stone to stone to stone, reading every single one, and I'd be there for a long time, but hopefully
that's okay. There's no time limit at the cemetery, so you're welcome to stay all day.
Yeah, I love doing that kind of stuff. I will spend hours in the cemetery trying to figure out stories, and that's what started this podcast. It was me trying to figure out stories in one cemetery, and it exploded from there. But it's just so wonderful that you get to do this. And now my question is, and I don't know if I saw anything on this, and maybe I didn't. Have you worked with any groups of like students or younger people who are interested in learning about preservation and the techniques, or doing history projects at all?
Well, I'm so glad you said that because I wanted to make sure to bring that up. I think that's really the secret sauce, if you will. I think it's really important to get younger folks engaged in this sort of activity and have that interest, especially at a younger age. And my hope is it carries forward in the coming years. So to answer your question, yes, and I'll give you one example. I'm very fortunate. I serve on a board at a university in Missouri called Missouri Western State University, and they have an organization called Center for Service, where students do philanthropic work in the community.
Oh, cool.
And through my relationship with the university, I've reached out to them. I also serve on a board of a cemetery in St. Joseph called Mount Mora. So in a way, I'm thinking I can play the part of eHarmony and getting students involved in cemetery preservation.
I love it.
So we did that. We had a group of 40 students visit Mount Mora Cemetery. We also engaged one of the biology professors to talk about biological growth on the headstones. And she also did some research on D2 cleaner, so she could talk about chemically how it reacts and responds to the growth. And then we're very fortunate. We have a terrific historian at Mount Mora Cemetery that gave a little background and discussion on Mount Mora, which was established in 1851 and has 4 Missouri governors buried there, Pony Express riders, and just a really rich history. So the students had a wonderful day. And even before we were finished, several of them came up to me and said, "When can we come back and do it again?" So
Yay!
I think
that's awesome.
I think I hooked them. So that's a good thing.
Yes. Because it is, we get to do it for so long and then we will get too old and we won't be able to do it anymore. So we need the younger people to want to do it too. And yes, there are plenty of young people who are interested in history and stuff. Some of them just don't realize until later the connections between history and the cemeteries, and then they put it together. So that the fact that you are able to get them started now is phenomenal. And like you said, some of them are probably definitely hooked for life now, and they're gonna, wherever they end up at, they will be in the cemeteries helping to preserve them. So that'll be great. And as college students, they're going to spread out across the country at some point. So cemeteries across our country will be lucky to get some of those students, I'm sure, in the future to help them out. That's fabulous. So you were mentioning you go home and you research these stories because you get all excited when you look at the names and the dates and stuff. What are some of your favorite stories that you have discovered in your work doing all of this?
Well, obviously George Breckenridge, that goes in a lot of different angles, but that one stands out. Another one that stood out to me, it was just striking when I saw this large obelisk. It was about, I estimated it to weigh 800 pounds, or certainly larger obelisk than that. But it was laying on the ground. And the fortunate side, one, I knew I had to set it back up either way. But the thing that was really eye-catching was the individual's name was George Blankenship. And it mentioned that George Blankenship was 105 years old.
Oh, wow.
Well, yes. And Mr. Blankenship passed in 1859. So I would guess there was not too many individuals living to be 105 years old, certainly not in 1859.
No.
So he was born in Virginia in let me get my math right, in 1754 and passed in 1859. Wow. He outlived 3 wives, including I'll say his third and final wife. She passed away 6 months before he did, and she was 65 years old, which was a very old age at that time.
But so much younger than him.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what was in the water that Mr. Breckenridge was drinking back in the 1800s, but I just found that incredibly fascinating. Yeah. That he lived to be 105 years old, and in fact, that's one of the one I repaired the whole monument, and he has his own QR code to learn the story and history behind Mr. Breckenridge. So
I mean, you think about it. He was born, you said 1754?
Before
1754.
So before the American Revolution, and he would have lived through all of that and watched the country become a country. at that point
that's
as a
the
young man.
amazing part. Yeah,
Yeah,
through his eyes, what did he see and experience?
that's
Absolutely.
crazy. And the fact that he ended up from, he started out in Virginia, obviously, and ended up in Missouri. So everything that would have happened in between and all the, wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing. Also, I had a counselor in high school named George Blankenship. I wonder if there's any relationship.
It could be.
If there's a
Another
connection.
story, another quick story I was going to share. And this is kind of I'll call it a heartwarming story. Along with doing community workshops and so forth, I also do presentations in historical societies, just indoor presentations, if you will, talking about cemetery preservation and kind of the history behind it. I concluded one of the sessions I held in a rural market. And at the conclusion of it, I had a woman of advanced years approach me with an envelope. And on it, she had my name and the date of the presentation and asked if she could visit with me. And I said, of course. And I said, I'd love to see what's in your envelope. It must be very important. She said, it is. She said, this is the headstone for my great great grandfather that is falling over and needs to be cleaned. And she said, this is on my bucket list and you're the man to do it.
Aw.
So I took it upon myself. I cleaned that headstone up. I straightened it up and I photographed what I had done and I mailed it to her. So I fulfilled a bucket list item for a woman of advanced years. So that was one of the most rewarding things I worked on.
Oh man, that's cool.
Oh, and I bet she was so happy to get those final pictures to see the headstone fixed.
Yes. And, I had included a handwritten note with my photographs that I sent to her. And she, as you would expect, very gracious to send back a thank you note herself. So we developed a real bond and a relationship from it. So, that I wanted to share that story. It's just really powerful for sure.
Oh yeah. I think that's one of the best things about working in cemeteries is those relationships that end up being built, and those bonds that you just don't even expect it until it starts to happen. And then it's just there and it stays around. Like you don't think about it when you first start. And I'm sure when you first started out, you were thinking about your own family history and realizing you needed to repair your own family stones. And it started with that. But now you're fixing the stones for other families. And they're just so grateful to be able to have somebody like you that can do that work for them.
Well, and so many people look at it as a money-making operation. And you definitely do not, which I think is fantastic. But the supplies are expensive. So do you get any help with offsetting some of the costs for the D2 and the epoxy and the luffs and everything else?
I do not, and it's by design. I feel like this is simply my way of giving back to society. And the other side benefit that I always tell my wife, I said, well, since no one has hired me and they're not paying me, they in turn cannot fire me. So
it's true.
That's kind of a good thing. I do it tongue in cheek, but frankly, I'm happy to buy my own supplies, my own equipment, and it's not a big deal. And I'm happy to do it.
I think it's fantastic because more times than not, we run into so many people that they may get, one or two projects done, and then all of a sudden they think they're headstone experts and off they go charging, astronomical amounts. And I think it's really cool that you just do this this is your calling to do this. I think it's wonderful.
Now you had mentioned at the beginning when you first started this, you were living in Dallas and now you live in the Kansas City area. Is the restoring of the headstones and doing this preservation work, is that what led you to move there? Or had you already kind of made a plan that you were going to end up moving back to Missouri at some point anyway?
No, my plan was when I retired, I was fortunate I retired at a relatively young age, but the plan was always to return to Northwest Missouri. And while St. Joseph, Missouri is my hometown, I lived in Kansas City for a number of years. And my wife and I wanted to return to Kansas City, so that's where we moved shortly thereafter. All the repairs, everything I've done has been in the state, Missouri and Kansas, basically. But I did no cemetery preservation work when I was in Texas at all.
That's what I was thinking about that. I was like, because this whole thing started with your own family background. So that made me assume you were from Missouri
Right.
originally. And then went down to Texas. But I think it's amazing the amount of work. I mean, you've done a lot of work in a lot of areas
Yeah.
in cemetery or in Missouri. And like you said, Kansas, which is right there for you and over the border. But I think that's awesome that you can do that and that you've been able to garner so much interest from people to want to do it as well. So it's not just you by yourself going around doing all of this, but you're teaching so many others to do it, and they join you and they invite you out to do it, and they call on you to help them out and learn. And I think that's so awesome. And there is actually a picture of you with John Appel that you sent us.
When you
From
do
was
this,
that from this past summer in
That's
July?
correct. Yeah, I reached out to John, and the tour I attended, participated in, I don't know, a number of his
48
sessions.
state tour.
Yes, that's correct. So I reached out to him through my involvement with the Mount Morris Cemetery in St. Joseph. And fortunately, I guess I was persuasive and pestering enough. I know he has a lot to choose from, but we were honored to have the 48 state tour with Jonathan make Mount Morris and St. Joseph one of his stops in 2024. So yeah, he was there, and it's always great to interact with him. And like anyone that hangs out with John and attends his sessions, you're always going to learn something new each and every time. And in fact, I was joking with him. He was using one technique, and I said, I've attended your workshops for a number of years. I said, the way you're doing this now is different. He goes, yeah, sometimes I change it up a little bit. So, and I said, well, the way you're doing it now, I said, I like it better. So I'll follow your lead and do it that way moving forward. So
Yeah, because
he's
we
a
had
terrific
him.
guy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we had him in July.
It had to have been right after he was in Missouri
Yeah,
because he
either
was in
right
Missouri
after or
around,
right before. Because I
yeah,
think we
somewhere
were
around that time last summer.
Yep. I think either St. Joseph or Missouri was his next stop, or he had just come from Missouri before he came to us. So that's sort of interesting too.
Yeah, and we got to spend the weekend learning from him and resetting some of the stones at Evergreen Cemetery where Diane's at, which was great. I mean, there's still a lot of work to do at Evergreen, but
Oh, yeah, definitely.
it's a big cemetery. It's a big one. There's a lot of people buried there. But it was great to have him. And again, like you said, he's one of those, he's been doing it for, I don't know, however many years. So he's one of the best to learn from as far as techniques
Definitely.
and what to do because he's been doing it for so long. So it's we were grateful to be able to get him out here this summer too, or this past summer too. So
Right.
and we had a good turnout of people that some who had done
Yeah, it was.
his workshops and stuff before, but we had several people who had never done it but were interested in learning and came out and they got some skills and they have, developed, I think, a love of wanting to do the preservation work too, which that is one of the best things about that tour is because he does go to all the lower 48 states. He can get a lot of different people interested in coming out and learning a little bit about how to do this work. And hopefully they take it to the areas where there isn't anybody doing as much preservation work. There are some states, and we've talked about this before, like the East Coast has a lot of people back east who are very interested in the cemeteries and do a lot more work. But the further west we come, it seems like there's less and less. But it is definitely, I think, picking up within the last several years where there's more interest in the
Oh,
preservation of the
definitely. There's a
cemeteries.
lot more people doing it.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And I do think online resources have helped a lot too. There's a lot more people doing genealogy research than there used to be because of things like ancestry.com and some of those sites where people have access where they didn't before. And that really helps get them interested. And then, of course, we've heard several stories of people who were doing their own genealogy research and then they decided to go to the cemetery because they figured out somebody was buried in his cemetery nearby, and that that then developed their interest in doing the work in the cemetery and cleaning things up and finding out who's in charge and all of that, because sometimes you don't know where to start. But with like the things you've done and the fact that you go around sharing all of this information, you give people a good foundation of where to start if they didn't know, what to do first, because sometimes you don't.
Well, I think that's a lot of it's just gaining the knowledge. Where do you, I have a desire, but okay, that's great. How do I start to move the ball, if you will, and
Right.
reach out to the correct entity that has oversight and ask questions and be persistent and show your desire, and even if it's to the point I made earlier, if it's not fixing headstones or cleaning headstones, most people and most organizations would grant you approval to go in and pick up branches and clean up a cemetery. And by doing that, you might be well respected in the community, and they would look favorably upon you doing some cleaning and some other activities in there as well.
Oh, yeah. And I'm sure especially in more rural areas where there's fewer people, there's not probably an overseer, a general, like the city cemeteries, like Evergreen, where the city actually hires the landscapers who
There's a
go in and
staff.
they take care of the mowing, and there's an actual staff. A lot of those rural cemeteries in the Midwest, especially, because the communities are so small, there isn't an actual staff to care for them on a regular basis. So
I would say, in you're really talking about something that's near and dear to my heart. There's many cemeteries that I'll say are forgotten and abandoned. They are overgrown now. It's no one's fault. I mean, the ancestors have moved away, they've passed away, and those are the ones that really are powerful for me personally. If I can gather and inspire a group of citizens to tackle that project and clear off the land and restore and preserve and create even some simple signage to commemorate where these cemeteries are. We just restore these sacred sites the way they should be. And I think that's, like I said earlier, something pretty important and an obligation we have as society. And it doesn't take a lot of work. It just takes persistence and some like-minded people all pulling in the same direction, and it can be accomplished. And we've been very successful in restoring a number of cemeteries that were overgrown and lost to history. And that's what makes it so rewarding. It really does.
I love it. And it's
So
such a
when you
great
do
way to
that-
get outside and get some fresh air. And, if you're not somebody who likes to work out at the gym, but you go work in the cemetery, you're still exercising and you're getting your vitamin D and all of that stuff. And it's still a great way to work together. And you can bring a whole community together that way too.
So when you find one of those abandoned cemeteries, is it more you find the cemetery and then you locate the contact person for that cemetery, or are they coming to you asking for help? What do we do with our cemetery? And then how long do you stay involved with that group once you teach them at least the basic techniques of cleaning and some repairs?
It really comes in both directions. Sometimes I'll be driving around or made aware of, someone will say, there's an old cemetery back here, and I think they do that just to pique my interest, knowing that I'll check into it and go down that rabbit hole. But I always do that, and try to find out who may be the local entity that has anything resembling oversight, and try to find somebody within the local community and say, I discovered this. I'll help provide guidance. I'll do some training, but it's up to the folks in the community to go clear the debris and the brush and so forth. And then some cemeteries are further down the line where they're fairly well cleaned up, and they're just looking for some direction in terms of how do I clean and how do I restore the monuments that are there. And that's where, again, I'm happy to put on these workshops and do that. But at the end of the day, I just have to turn it over to the local folks. And I'm happy to come back at a later date, and we'll do a second level class or something like that. But it really takes community involvement.
Yeah.
Missouri's a big state. Along the way, I'm privileged. I serve on the board of Missouri Preservation, which is afforded me the opportunity to interact with a lot of people across the state that are like-minded in cemetery preservation. And frankly, we've developed a pretty good network,
Oh, that's
who
amazing.
live. Yeah, that's the other real benefit of this is connecting just folks that are passionate about this.
Now, does Missouri, since it is a lot of the state is very rural because it's farmland, do you have a lot of cemeteries that are on private property that would have been like just family cemeteries? Are there a lot of those in Missouri?
Absolutely, there certainly are, and obviously the right thing, and you're required to gain approval of the property owner, and avoid trespassing. And
Right.
at the same time, ancestors have legal rights to visit the grave sites of their descendants. And most times I have found the landowners, if you ask correctly and ahead of time, they know they have a cemetery there, and they're supportive of that. And many times these small, I'll say, family plotted cemeteries setting in the middle of a farm, there may be farming around the perimeter, and they are
Yep.
maintained as a sacred site in the middle of a cornfield or soybean field. And it's phenomenal, but it's a real testament to the individual that owns the land that they
Yeah.
take a lot of pride in maintaining those sites as well.
I'm so thankful when families do that, and in some cases, it is their actual family cemetery because they've inherited the land and they're still there farming it. So they maintain their cemeteries. But there are situations where it's a new farmer that came in and took over that land, but still maintains the family plot, which I do appreciate
That's
when
mhm.
somebody does that for that family that was there originally. So I just figured, I know in Kansas and even across Nebraska and Ohio, there's a lot of those family cemeteries that they do, that you're driving along and they pop, there's a cornfield cemetery, cornfield.
Yeah,
Just
I
like,
don't think we
wait.
have much. We don't have much like that here, do we,
No,
Jen?
we have more of our, because so many of our cemeteries, especially our older ones, were related to the gold rush. We have the ghost towns with the connected
True.
cemeteries. And we've had some cemeteries that have disappeared altogether because of that. But
Okay. Not
we don't have, there's not as many, well, maybe further south on the, south of you, maybe where
Eastern.
there's more ranching
Yeah,
and farming, but, and maybe even in the eastern part of the state, like up towards Sterling and stuff, there might be some
mm,
more that way, but
that'd be interesting.
yeah. I
Now we
do.
gotta
Well,
go
I
look
do
and
know
find.
Estes Park because I researched it once because I was like, where are people in Estes Park buried? There isn't an actual cemetery for Estes Park. It's all mostly private cemeteries on private land up in that area.
That's interesting.
That's from the research I've been able to do up there, which I haven't done a ton, but well,
Interesting.
Kurt, we are so thankful that
Oh,
you wanted
thank
to
you. It's
join
so
us
much
tonight
fun.
and tell us your experience. How can, if people are in the Missouri area or even the Kansas area nearby, how can they reach out to you if they're looking, they've never connected with you, but they're looking to connect and get your information? What are some of the best ways to make that connection?
Well, it's pretty simple. You've mentioned Casey Cemetery Man. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, and I do have a dedicated website, kccemeteryman.com, and my email is on there to
Perfect.
connect with me, and I'm happy to
Instagram.
respond and provide whatever support and direction I can to other individuals.
And I will link all of that in our show notes, folks. So if you're in the area and you've never met Kurt, but you want to, or you have a cemetery or even just an individual grave that you want to reach out to him about, he will be happy to help you out with that. So you can definitely do that. We'll put that in the notes. Do you have any final words or any final story that you want to share with our listeners before we go for the night?
Well, one's kind of interesting. You've been sharing a photograph of a group of ladies in front of a couple of
Oh,
large
yes.
monuments.
The one behind
I
Diane.
wanted to explain that. It's really kind of a cute little quick story.
Yeah.
But the group of ladies that I'm photographed there with, one is my wife in the photograph, and the rest are ladies that I graduated from high school with more
Oh,
than 40
cool.
years ago. So they reached out to me. They know this is what I'm involved with, and they had all. I'm going to use the term they pestered me. It wasn't that powerful, but they said we want to go clean headstones with you. So we set up a day to go clean headstones at the
Oh,
Mount Morris Cemetery in St. Joseph. and they had a wonderful time. And there they are, the ladies I went to high school with, and that's my wife in front with me. But all the other ladies I've known beyond 40 years. So we had a great day of cleaning monuments at Mount Mora, and then we followed it up with a nice lunch together. So really, really a fun day. So very much a social event, as well as giving back to the community and cleaning headstones.
I think
Well,
that's the best way to do a class reunion.
And then all of a sudden you're like 18 again, right? Because I know when I went to my 40th, and some of the people I hadn't seen since we graduated from high school, it was like immediately, it's like you were 18, 17, 18 years old again.
Well, in fact, I have a class reunion coming up this summer, and one of the side excursions, if you will, of a class reunion, the day before the actual reunion, we're gathering, and I'm going to lead a workshop on how to clean headstones for my classmates that day. I've been
I
asked
love
to do
it.
that. So,
Well, and they
cool
always want to
idea.
know where you ended up, every 10 years, whatever, where your life went. This is probably one of the best ways. It's super fascinating one, because you get the people who are like, you do what? You spend time in cemeteries, and there's those people that will always kind of be a little weirded out by it, but many more people are fascinated by it. So the fact that they want you to teach this class as part of your reunion, I think is the best thing ever.
I can't even think.
I do too. Yeah.
Just think how much fun that would be, though, if you come back to your class reunion, say many that we got like 4 or 5 high schools here, that they come back one day and just clean headstones.
Oh yeah, you could have a whole nice little setup for this. And like you said, it takes you back to when you were young, so you're sharing stories of what you guys were probably doing at 17, 16, 17, 18 years old as you're cleaning the cemetery up. So you get that, and then also picking up the history of the cemetery itself. So I think I might have to pitch that to our next class reunion.
It's a great way to give back to the community. And we also make a donation to the board and everything to support the maintenance. And at the same time, I do have to share that the girls from my class said if I brought up headstone cleaning when I was in high school, they would have thought it was creepy and would have stayed away from me. But now all of a sudden, it's kind of an okay thing.
Yeah, that's true.
It changes as we get older.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I think that is so much fun.
Well, the original building that I went to high school, the first 3 years of high school in, was right across the street from a cemetery. My senior year, we were in a new building that was a little further up the road, but we could go back and clean that same cemetery. It would be fine. Most of the people I went to high school with are still in Nebraska, so they're still in the area. We'll just go clean that cemetery, which we did spend time in as teenagers sometimes, because it was a small town. There wasn't a lot of other places to hang out. So
yeah, that's what we did too.
Yeah, we were a one stoplight town at that time. So it was one of those. But well, Kurt, thank you so much. I'm so glad you joined us tonight. And again, folks, we'll link everything in the show notes. So if you need to learn more from Kurt, you'll be able to reach out to him through his website or through his Instagram or Facebook pages. And thank you again. And if you ever want to join us, we'd be happy to have you back for more.
I'd be honored to come back. That would be great.
Thank you for joining us today. To learn more about today's episode, visit our website, theordinaryextraordinarycemetery.com, where you'll find additional links in our show notes. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe to our channel. And if you enjoyed this or any of our episodes, consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Your support helps others find our show and discover all of our ordinary, extraordinary stories.
You can also follow us on social media for cemetery facts, photos, quotes, and more. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, and on X at OrdExtraCem. If you'd like to help support us financially, you can donate a cup of coffee by clicking on the coffee cup icon on our website or YouTube, or purchase some of our fabulous Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery merchandise through our store link.
Until we meet again.